They've decided they're putting Vice President Harris in charge of the border. I mean, because what we definitely need is somebody whose first reaction to every awkward question is to cackle like the Joker. She's been put in charge of the border. They said this a week ago. She's not gone down to the border, so far as I'm aware, nor has she actually given a press conference on the border, so far as I'm aware. But she did speak to the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and say that help is here. Si se puede or something. Here is VP Harris.
This past year, it's been difficult, both for your bottom line and for your peace of mind. 1 in 4 small businesses have closed, thousands owned by Latinos. These numbers reinforce what we already know. The situation is urgent. When the president and I were preparing to take office, he promised that help is on its way. Well, now help is here.
Help is here, is it? Well, I'm noticing on the border, there are some people who seem disproportionately Hispanic in origin, and the help isn't there, as it turns out. It turns out that in some of these facilities, you're holding people at like 1,000% of capacity. So you haven't been down there. Every time you get asked a question, you just start cackling like a crazy person, but help is here or something. Well, the good news is we will always have stalwart fighters for the people at the border, their human rights, stalwart fighters like Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. Now, let's be real about this. She is just a breath of fresh air. She is so fresh, so face. I mean, not just a fresh face, so fresh and so face. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. In fact, she is so fresh and so face that she brought her super fresh, super face all the way down to the border, you'll remember, during the Trump administration, where in a totally spontaneous, non-planned public relations act, she ended up at a fence in front of a parking lot that was a ways away from a border facility. And there she broke down in a pure display of unbridled compassion and emotion in which she stared directly into camera for some reason while wearing a perfectly white outfit because feminist power. And you remember it was these amazing pictures of just the incredible emotion on display when she saw the cruelty, the malevolence, the malice, the brutality of the Trump administration and their treatment of illegal immigrants at the border, holding kids in cages, and she couldn't take it anymore. And she went down there, and like Sarah Connor in Terminator 2, in the dream sequence, she put her hands in the chain link fence, and she screamed to the heavens, "Why, oh God, why would you allow such evil to take place on this planet and in this country? Why?" Well, now Joe Biden is holding like a multiple of that number of kids in cages, and they're like packed together in the middle of a COVID pandemic. And AOC has not been down to the border. Probably she just hasn't had time or something, because she's super sincere and brilliant. She probably just hasn't had time to be down at the border. Or maybe that white outfit is still at the dry cleaners. I mean, it's been like a couple of years, but it's not a great dry cleaners, to be honest with you. And maybe that photographer was, I don't know, like booked. Okay, but she hasn't been down to the border or anything. But she did have time to do an Insta. She did an Insta. And when she did her Insta, she discussed what is happening on the border. And let me just say, the pearls of wisdom floweth like water from that so fresh, so face. A few decades ago, private citizens used to be largely that, private. What has changed? Interwebs. Think about everything you've browsed, searched for, watched, tweeted. Now imagine all of that data being crawled through and collected and aggregated by third parties into a permanent public record, your record. To keep my data private when I go online, I turn to ExpressVPN. Here's how it works. It's super simple. All you have to do is go to your cell phone. Right now it says not connected. Boom, I hit connected. Connecting. Done. Data harvesters will use your IP to uniquely identify you and your location with ExpressVPN. However, my connection gets rerouted to an encrypted server. My IP address is masked and anonymized. Every time I turn ExpressVPN on, I'm given a random IP address shared by other ExpressVPN customers. That makes it tougher for third parties to identify me and harvest my data. If, like me, you believe your data is your business, secure yourself with the #1 rated VPN on the market. Visit expressvpn.com/Ben. Get 3 extra months for free. That's expressvpn.com/Ben. Go to expressvpn.com/Ben to learn more. Here was AOC talking about the border crisis and saying some of the most intellectually incisive things I have ever heard about the border. It's like when Einstein, I'm sure, would give a disquisition on the physics of relativity. That's like AOC on border policy, except Einstein was a piker. She is just the amount of intellectual firepower here. It's pretty astonishing. I will say that. Here she was, really sounding off in emotional fashion about what's happening under President Biden at the border, where, again, a multiple of children are now being held than were ever held under Trump.
Often people want to say, why aren't you talking about the border crisis? Or why aren't you talking about it in this way? Well, we're talking about it. They just don't like how we're talking about it because it's not a border crisis. It's an imperialism crisis. It's a climate crisis. It's a trade crisis. Anyone who's using the term surge around you consciously is trying to invoke a militaristic frame. And that's a problem because this is not a surge. These are children and they are not insurgents and we are not being invaded.
Deep thoughts. Mind blown. I mean, it's not a border crisis, guys. It's an imperialism crisis, don't you see? It's because America invaded these Central and Latin American nations and all these people. They didn't cross the border crossed them, or alternatively, they crossed the border illegally. But it's an imperialism crisis. Also, it's a climate crisis. Sure, it's not a climate crisis. Sure, you're blaming all this on a hurricane that happened like months and months and months ago, and then the surge started, and the surge happened like way after the hurricane. But it's a climate crisis, guys. It is not a policy crisis. There is no crisis on the border. It's a figment of your imagination. You know how I know? Because if it were a crisis on the border, she'd be down there in a white outfit crying at the border. That's how you know. I don't have to watch the news. I don't have to pay attention to any of the stats. All I have to do is watch whether AOC is taking an emotionally overwrought photo at the border to tell whether we have a climate crisis or a border crisis. And she says, no border crisis. I believe her. No border crisis, guys. It is not a border crisis. It is an imperialism crisis. It's a climate crisis. And it is a trade crisis because the balance of trade is off or there aren't tariffs or something. I know that when we have a trade dispute with Canada, we immediately get a huge surge of Canadians just coming over that northern border. Happens all the time. We've been having this massive trade standoff with the Chinese government, and that's what we've been getting. It's just an enormous number of Chinese expatriates just leaving, just right there on the border. Amazing. Because that's how trade policy works, guys. It's incredible. Also, surge. Don't use the word surge. Never use the word surge. I can't do it. Don't use the word surge. Because if you use the word surge, you are invoking insurgents. You see, she put a prefix and a suffix. She put in and ins before and after the word surge, and boom, you're using a militaristic frame. When you say there's a surge, normally, like, this is what I think. Like when, let's say the lights go out in my house, right? And I think, oh my gosh, maybe there was a power surge. I'm using a militaristic frame because what I really mean is that my electricity is a guerrilla force. It is an insurgent force. When I put a surge protector into the wall to stop that sort of thing from happening, that's because I'm an imperialist and I'm attempting to stop those guerrilla insurgent electrics from invading my toaster. Surge insurgents, same thing. Same thing. See, here's the thing. She knows the deep etymology of these words. She understands that both words actually do come from the Latin word for rise. This is true. That's what she knows. She knows that. And she knows that when you say there's a surge of people at the border, what you mean, you bastard, what you mean is that children are like terrorist militants. Also, she knows that not only does surge mean that, follow the logic here, okay? When you say surge, what you really mean is that one time you knew an Eastern European guy named Serge, and Serge was not the best guy. Serge was the kind of guy who wouldn't pick you up at the airport. And that made you think of insurgents. So when you said surge, you meant that guy Serge, who's a bad guy, and also made you think of insurgents. And so you are just slamming all that together to rip on the children. And that's the problem here. These people? You want these people in charge? That's what you want? These ones? These ones? Seriously? I hope you enjoyed that clip from The Ben Shapiro Show. If you did, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you stay up to date on all of our future content.